Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Black Mirror Season 4, Episode 2, Arkangel. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Season 4 of Black Mirror, one episode at a time. This video is where I cover Arkangel. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for Arkangel. If you haven't seen this episode, you will not want to watch this video. Otherwise, some things may be spoiled for you. However, this video will not contain spoilers from other episodes of Black Mirror, so if you haven't seen the other episodes of Black Mirror, don't worry, they will not be spoiled here for you. So, in this video I did for episode 1, the USS Callister, I talked about how I loved season 4 and it's my favorite season of Black Mirror so far, and I mentioned I thought 5 out of the 6 episodes of the season were great. And there was only one episode I found that was just okay and I wasn't that big of a fan of. And I was referring to this episode, Arkangel, which to me was my clear least favorite episode of the season. But don't get me wrong, I didn't think this was a bad episode. And part of what I loved about season 4 is I don't think it had any bad episodes, which I think all 3 previous seasons have had. But this was clearly subpar to the other 5 episodes in the season. Now, this was a very good idea, and I think this episode had a very promising start. I just don't think it went anywhere worthwhile, and more to the point, this episode was far too predictable. Now, the episode tries to make commentary on the dangers of helicopter parenting, and this is a message I can actually get behind. If anything else, from my own personal experience as a teenager where I was dealing with depression, my parents' interference actually made my depression much worse, and so my teenage years would have been better had my parents simply left me alone to fail on my own and learn from my mistakes. But it's perhaps, this for that reason that I care so much for this issue that I didn't care much for this episode, as I found the commentary provided on this issue insufficient and only covers like the rudimentary aspects of it. The message was beyond clear, and they didn't really do much to expand beyond that, as the whole concept of the Arkangel to be able to see everything your child sees is a bit out there, but what's worse is the function that allows the parent to filter out anything stressful. Now, I'm not saying I don't think it's plausible something like this would be created and used. I think it's incredibly plausible, and there's some fascinating commentary that could be had comparing the filter to censorship of television and movies and whatnot. I just don't think what happens in this episode quite goes there, and the commentary it does make is quite obvious and elementary. For example, let's look at the stress filter. It very obviously could stunt a child's growth as a child experiences stress for a reason. This is shown where her grandfather has a heart attack and the filter comes on, which blocks it out. But it's kind of important that she knows something's wrong so she could get help. Also, when it blocks out things like the barking dog that's there to teach her to be fearful of things that could possibly harm her, and by blocking it out, it sort of stunts that aspect of her growth. This, I think, should be obvious to anyone, but then again, it could be interesting commentary on how intrusive parenting is becoming in the modern era, but then again, this takes it to an almost unbelievable extreme. So I actually think this episode would have been much more interesting had the Arkangel been more widely used and not just an experimental prototype. Like, for example, in the first season episode, The Entire History of You, where the grain, which lets you see all the memories and display them for others to see, was in that episode was widely used and accepted. In fact, those who didn't use the grain were seen as weird and unusual. To me, that would be even more powerful commentary on how common helicopter parenting is becoming, and then you could present a parent character who doesn't use Arkangel and how everyone thinks they're weird, but then you see how their child is actually more adept and is overall more healthy and has a better life output or overall view because of the lack of interference. To me, this would be a much more interesting way to tell the story than simply having Sarah being the sole outliner. In fact, in this episode, they even mention when Sarah is a child that Arkangel was banned in Europe, and it eventually gets banned in the US, and so Sarah is an anomaly. So to me, this makes this episode less interesting. Although it's realistic to think something like this would be banned, as I said, it's really obvious that this could stunt a child's growth, but I actually think some of the more powerful social commentary stories stretch believability in order to make powerful analogies that are relevant to today's society. Take, for example, the episode 15 Million Merits from Season 1. The world is presented in that episode isn't particularly believable or explored very well, but it makes some excellent commentary on today's society through the use of analogy. However, looking at this episode as is, it does present some commentary, as it does show that Sarah's growth is being stunted by the Arkangel when she freaks out and stabs herself in order to see the blood. But this almost makes commentary specifically on the stress filter, which is admittedly out there. In fact, at the start of the episode, the mom even says that she doesn't think she'll use this. But I thought we'd explore more of the long-term effects on Sarah by having this device and filter in her life and how this changed her outlook on the world. But instead, after the blood incident, Sarah's mom realizes that Arkangel is having consequences on her growth, and so she stops using it. So first of all, I'm not sure I buy the whole, it can't be removed, but you can set the device aside and just stop using it. To me, this seems like an obvious plot device so that Sarah still has Arkangel in her as a teenager, because surely it could be removed. And if it's made illegal, which is implied by the time she's a teenager it is, then you think there'd be some program or some way to remove it, or at least ensure that it isn't used again. If not remove it, then make it dormant. But more to the point, because of this, Sarah as a teenager is more or less an average girl, since Arkangel hasn't been used in her for over a decade. So they do drop hints that her growth is a bit stunted, as she seems a little socially inept, and when she's having sex she acts like a porn star, meaning everything she knows she learned from porn. But I feel that could apply to any sheltered teen, even in the modern era, so not really that unique to Arkangel. So for the most part, we don't see what effect Arkangel had on her because it was removed at such a young age. Again, I think the commentary and just overall story would have been much more powerful had the Arkangel been commonly used. Anyways, I really liked the first half of the episode, and I was wondering where they'd take it, but as soon as we got the montage of her walking past the dog and they age her up to a teenager, I pretty much predicted the rest of the episode right there. As soon as I saw they were going to focus on her as a teenager, I'm like, oh, okay, so this is what they're doing with the episode. And the rest of the episode went down pretty much exactly as I thought it would. And frankly, this isn't just unoriginal, it's also uninspired, and I think they could have done much more with this premise. And again, I think the message of overbearing parents with a teenage child is an important one, but I think it's more important than the way this episode handles it, which is kind of just bland and vanilla and more to the point, predictable. Also, I do think this episode was severely undercut by the fact that this technology wasn't commonly used. So instead of being a commentary on society at large, it's just about one singular overbearing mother who stunts their child's growth. And quite frankly, that's a story that I've seen dozens of times before. Because here you have one mother using banned technology that's rare and hardly exists. So it's basically saying society is smart and it does know the dangers of helicopter parenting and how it can stunt a child's growth. It's just this one dumb mother who can't resist herself. And to me, that is infinitely less interesting. But as I said before, I don't hate this episode, and there are things about it I do like. Most of all, the craftsmanship in this episode has to be noted. It was beautifully acted, beautifully shot, well directed, well put together. So yeah, that is something that really stands out in season 4. Also, I could follow and relate to Sarah's mother, Marie, and her character journey, has it started with her being very fearful and that something could happen to her child, which is understandable. So you relate to her on that aspect. And her progression of not wanting to use Arkangel because of the effect it had on her growth, is, you admire her for that. But then years later, she's tempted into using Arkangel again when she's found out that she's being lied to. That's a temptation I dare say very few parents would be able to refuse in that situation. I mean, what parent wouldn't want to know what their misbehaving teenager is up to when they're obviously lying to them? In some ways, her actions could seem justified, as Sarah did get pregnant at 15 and was doing coke, but obviously the way Maria went about it was wrong, as she forced her boyfriend to stop seeing her and gave her contraceptives to stop the pregnancies without her knowledge, when really she should have simply went to her and talked to her about it. Also, from a production perspective, I do like how they revealed the way that she was pregnant. As you see Marie get a message from Arkangel, but you don't know what it is, and then you see her go to the pharmacy, and the next thing you know, Sarah is getting sick at school, and then being told it's from an emergency contraceptive. Now, I can understand Sarah's reaction to finding out about this, but I thought the whole smashing her over the head with the pad was a bit over the top. I mean, they were trying to say it was easier for her to beat her mother because of the filter, and when the filter turned off, she just realized how badly she beat her. But I don't actually buy that, and that seems like a contrived use of the filter. Surely she would know how badly she was beating her mother just by touch and by feel, and she could feel the strength in her arms as she was hitting her. But I don't know, that's just me. And the other thing that I thought was kind of silly was the ending. It seemed almost too like Twilight Zone-y, like, ooh, isn't this ironic? When after Sarah ran away, and when Marie was trying to use the Arkangel, but it was completely broken and shattered, so she was in the position for her life as being like overbearing, like really fearful something would happen to her child, but because she let that fear get the better of her, that actually drove her child away, and she's unable to know what happened to her, and it's sort of implied that she'll never hear from her again because she ran away. Ooh, how ironic. I don't know, that seemed a bit forced to me. So anyway, also I just want to give a real quick Easter egg mention. This one in this episode is very obvious, that really stood out to me, is when the Arkangel scientist shows Sarah a violent show so she can filter it out. And that show is in fact a scene from Season 3, Episode 5, Men Against Fire. Having seen that recently, I caught that right away, but I'll get more into these Easter eggs in another episode, in another video. So my rating for Arkangel out of 10 is a 6 good. I do think this episode was well constructed in its first half, as it clearly established the fear the single mother felt about protecting her child, and it's understandable when she's using this interesting technology, which does make very relevant commentary on the dangers of helicopter parenting. However, the second half of the episode seems more like wasted potential, as there's a lot of ways this could have been a lot more interesting, but instead it just tells an unoriginal story of an overbearing mother that feels like I've seen it many times before, and the technology almost seems unnecessary to the story, and the same story could have been told pretty much exactly the same without this technology, which is a shame. As I said, I think a lot more could have been done. So that's it for my review of Arkangel. Be sure to check back here every week as I continue to review Season 4 of Black Mirror, one episode at a time. Also be sure to check out my channel as I cover many other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek The Expanse, Discovery, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.